Cool. Oh, good evening, everybody. Thank you again for joining us. This is the Pathways presentation, and I hope today to provide some insight into how the football industry is sort of looking at the moment, and obviously how we and others suggest that it gets navigated by people who have ambitions of becoming professional footballers, and obviously parents as well, trying to guide and provide opportunities for their boys. So just to start off, at the BSR Football Academy, our primary goal or mission is to develop aspiring footballers into successful professional football players through a holistic coaching program that will meet all the demands of the modern game. Now, we feel that we have to have a goal. We have to have a mission to which we're trying to achieve this goal. How we get there, there's many different options and many different pathways and many different obstacles that need to be overcome. So to start off, I'd like to start off by framing the common things that we hear players say and why these things are dangerous. So I have 6 stories there, but we feel that these are dangerous stories that players tell themselves. And the reason why they're dangerous is, which I'll outline after this slide, but these stories ultimately dictate their perceptions and their expectations. And the football industry isn't like traditional industries where there's minimum standards which you can achieve in order to progress. The football industry it's unknown. You can achieve maximum standards and be the best and still never make it. And managing your expectations and controlling those perceptions is important. So the first dangerous story, which we hear a lot, especially in the EDP group, is plan B is to make plan A work. And that's a very, very dangerous statement because it sets you up for disappointment. Because the reality, which I'll outline just now, is that it becomes very difficult to progress through the levels and to continue within the game if you only have one objective. And the more objectives you have, the easier it is to progress. Second one is all I have to do is show up to training and I'll become a pro. There's this expectation that the minimum standard is enough and that all players have to do is arrive at training and train every day at whatever intensity they can do on that day, and that will be enough to achieve success. The third one is I should be playing professional football already. And that's often we hear in boys 18 to 22 years old. And I'm going to show you why that's unlikely, or why that's dangerous, and why that's more likely not going to happen in most cases. So I'm just putting people in. Okay, the fourth one is the coaches, the system, the club didn't like me. The fifth one, it will be better when I get to Europe. And the last one is, I am different from the others. And I think these stories outline the common mental states or mentality that we see, the common mental states that we see when players join, especially our program. And we know by talking to other programs and other academies that these stories aren't uncommon. And this is the common theme that's running through youth football at the moment. So let's ask that you mute yourselves on the other side there. Cool. So the reality versus the expectations. Now, expectations have soared wildly in recent years, and it's probably due to the invention of social media, because what social media has done is it's created unrealistic expectations and an unrealistic portrayal of the process. Often Instagram, TikTok, Twitter only shows 30 seconds of life. And the reality is that most of the time, those are only good stories. And so what gets created within the player's mind or in the student's mind is that that's how the world works. And especially in football, people aren't posting about their failures. They're only posting about successes. So what this creates is that there's this expectation that success is the only way, and that if you do fail, that you're doing something wrong. And that's very, very dangerous, because the other thing it seemed to create, and this is a discussion we had when Zako went to Portugal, is that, and with other sporting codes, which I've had the opportunity to go and spend time with, is that at the moment in youth athletes, there's this sense of entitlement that if they do a certain thing, they deserve a certain outcome. And the reason why it's dangerous is because that's not necessarily how it works. And I'm sure most of the adults would understand that, especially in sport, that what you put in doesn't necessarily guarantee you success. And the expectation is that you're going to go from A to B fairly quickly, where the reality, as you can see from that picture, it's going to be messy. There's going to be failures. There's going to be ups and downs. And I think a lot of the players don't understand how many failures they'll have along the way. The second reality is that players are comparing oranges and apples. So we frequently overhear them or have discussions with them where they're saying things like, so-and-so is playing for Man United at 17 years old and I'm not. So that means, yeah, I'm not going to make it, or so-and-so is not going to make it. And the reality is you're not comparing the same thing there. You're comparing a boy born in Man United, raised in Man United, geographically there. So the likelihood of him playing for Man United is 1,000 times more than your likelihood, because geographically you're in a different place. And I'll explain legislatively as well why it's also dangerous. Obviously, there's also different socioeconomic contexts. South African football industry is built different to European models, South American models, American models, Asian models. So we have to be careful to compare to stories that are similar to our own. And I would encourage the players to identify with role models from similar backgrounds to them. So there's a boy, not boy, he's a young man at the moment, Klongwane, playing in the MLS, and he played for Maritzburg United in the PSL. So there is stories of players going from South African football into international football. Often what the role models the players are looking at are boys that have gone through the Man United or the Manchester City or the Barcelona academies. But what that does, that creates an unrealistic expectation of how their process is going to look. Cool. So to set the scene, we're very fortunate and that we are able to put up a picture where South African national team, and particularly the women's football team, has had continental success. And this is important because if you look at the two pictures, on top there's graduates from a university of such, and them. And if you took out the trophies and you took off the gowns and you swapped the uniforms over, you wouldn't know who's achieving what. And I think that's important, is that football has become a profession. It's no longer a hobby. And unfortunately, in South Africa, there still seems to be the sense that football is a sport. And therefore, it affects our approach to achieving success. In order to become a professional, there is an understanding, at least those who have been through tertiary education of some form, that arriving and just sitting in the lecture isn't enough to pass. You need to arrive, you need to listen, you need to study, you need to spend extra time, you need to be diligent, you need to respect the process, have positive habits, take accountability for your own work, be responsible for arriving on time, and also have the mentality that this is my profession, this is my job. It's not who I am, it's what I do. And I think that's important because often in football, players are happy to meet the minimum standard. But in Europe, football is a career, it's an industry. Players are professional footballers, that's what they call themselves. And they conduct themselves no different to doctors, physiotherapists, lawyers. They apply themselves after training, apply extra work, really become completely surrounded by the industry. And by doing that, their mentality obviously shifted in such a way that they conduct themselves like professionals. And the South African national women's team, most of you would understand the obstacles they've had to overcome to achieve what they've done, right? Across all spheres, financial, obviously gender-based, right, stereotypes and biases that have existed in sport, and to overcome that and remain professional and remain diligent and remain committed and remain responsible to achieve success is long-term. And most of these ladies have been at their craft for 10, 12 years in order to achieve this one moment. I think that's important, is that there's more obstacles before success. And that's typical in a professional environment. It's when you go to university, there's a lot of small tests that you have to take in order to pass. And you have to pass those tests, and you have to apply yourself every day. You can't just show up in December and hope to pass. And I think that's a mentality that exists across South African football, is that football is not taken seriously as a profession. It's seen as a sport. And I think that's a mind shift that we need to make in our own minds, at least. So what is education? So typically players will say, I'm a footballer. I'm not doing academics. But I think the bigger picture is that we're looking at it wrong. We're looking at education in terms of tertiary degrees, physiotherapy, Bachelor of Science, LLBs, accounting degrees. But education isn't that. Education is learning. And it can be academic and non-academic. And it's a self-investment. You're investing in developing yourself, either character development, developing passions outside of the field, off the field, right? Trades, crafts, internships, football badges and football education. And fortunately, there's economically viable courses that exist. There's free courses that you can use to see if that area or sector would interest you, and try and investigate. I think there needs to be this passion for learning, which doesn't seem to exist in a lot of youth athletes at the moment, where they're committing to the sport, and that's what I'm doing. But they're not trying to learn about the sport and really surround themselves with education, information, learning from different sectors, taking lessons from other people and trying to apply it. There's also the stereotype that players feel ashamed that if they admit that they have interest outside of football, that this may portray that they are not serious. I think that again, this is a dangerous preconceived idea, because we have to be aware that it's the combination of our knowledge and our education that helps us to build lessons. You can learn lessons off the field that will help you on the field. And that can come through courses, internships, spending time with people from different sectors, different points of view, and really trying to educate yourself. And I think that the one thing that's apparent is that education at school is one thing, but education in life, and typically in tertiary education, it's applied learning. It's taking knowledge that you from others and be able to apply it practically. And that's no different in any craft or any trade or any sector. And football is the same. So what's the reality of football then? Well, the reality of football is that between the ages of 18 and 23, it's a journey. And there's a lot of downs and ups as well. But professional football is changing. It's a continuously evolving project. And if we as coaches and academies and players and parents don't evolve with the sport, we get caught behind. For 97% of players, it will get worse before it gets better. And what I mean by that is that BSR provides a certain level of coaching, certain level of expertise on the auxiliary services, a certain level of facilities. And those facilities and coaching standards and auxiliary service standards aren't the norm. So for most players, when they enter the real world of football or in the football industry, some of those things will get worse before they get better. Now, I think that's a scary thought, but it's the reality that we need to face, and we need to prepare our boys to face. There's also this comparison between needing something and wanting something. And the reason why I say that is, this is the competitive nature of football, is that we will come across individuals who football is the only option that they have. And that's a different motivator from love and passion and commitment. It's not to say that will determine their success, but it's a different hunger. And I think it's also different. The players need to understand that once they interact with other players from other academies and hear their stories, that there's something definitely different in people who there's no option for them, and this is their only way out. And stories you hear like that. Also, the football industry is forgiving, but we have to think, who are we competing against? Globalization has changed the football industry completely. Before, clubs in Europe had to pay to get players to Europe, had to pay for flights, had to pay for accommodation, had to scout these players, had to go and get them early. Now, globalization has changed that. Now, the supply far outweighs the demand, and therefore, those clubs can pick and choose who they want. So that has changed the whole industry completely in terms of wanting to play internationally in different industries. So for most of our EDP players, they'll be in the transition years. Now, the transition years is the years 18 to 23. And this is a difficult time, with or without a contract. If you're 18 years old and you're with a contract at a professional PSL team, it's still a difficult time. There's a lot of uncertainty. And the biggest one is that you've gone from a fixed structure of academy football for most youth, where they've gone under 13, under 14, under 15, 17, 19. So they're seeing definite development. They're seeing progress, and they're going through the levels and they're seeing development. When you get to under 18, they unleash you to the big bad world. And frequently that's quite scary, and it's quite a shock, because there's no longer you're no longer seeing the development that you were seeing before. You now have 18-year-olds competing with adults. So physically there's a switch there. You also have stories of, but so-and-so is playing in the Premier League, right? And he's the same age as me. Often not necessarily, again, apples and oranges. So you have to be careful with that comparison. There's also a lot of uncertainty, because those with contracts aren't sure if that's their last contract, because there's a thing that goes around in the football world that your first contract could be your last. So there's a lot of uncertainty for them. Most of them are on one-year contracts. And those without contracts are obviously uncertain if they're ever going to get a contract. So there's a lot of uncertainty in this 5-year period. And there's also this perception that players are running out of time. Now, I personally don't think that's true, especially in these years, and I'll explain now why. But obviously the players feel that when you're 18, you feel like you're the new boys on the block. And when you become 19, the 18-year-olds join. So you're no longer the new boys on the block, and all the interest and all the hype shifts onto the younger players. But when they become 19, they feel exactly the same, and you become 20. So there's this shift. So players aren't running out of time, and I'll explain now why. But also competition is high. The thing is that there are 176 starting positions in the PSL each week. So there are very few spaces at the top, and a lot of players underneath trying to compete for 176 spaces. So the reason why I don't think players are running out of time is because there's a concept in sports science called early and late developers. And you can see it's just an infographic. I don't want to say it's official, but the youngest all-time players in the Premier League, and you can see the names on the list. And for most of you, you'll recognize some names. Personally, I only know 2 boys on that list when they were 16. And what that tells us is that early success doesn't guarantee long-term success. So making it at 15, 16, 17, 18 doesn't guarantee that you're going to have a successful professional football career. It just guarantees that you made it when you were 16 or 17. And this is why I was talking about social media is dangerous, because not many of these boys have gone on to represent England or represent the so-called big clubs in England, right? Obviously, Jack Wilshere and Aaron Lennon. And for most of you who know Jack Wilshere, he actually retired now at the age of 30, which is fairly young in modern times. And that's because he developed early. So he had all the physical characteristics, technical maturity to play at an earlier age. That doesn't mean that you're going to make it later. A late developer is someone who develops physically later, psychologically later, and the neuropsychological development of that player is different. And all the players are different throughout their age groups. The neuropsychological development normally matures at about 25. So there's still a lot of time to develop what's essentially become very important in football, which is football intelligence and tactical awareness. And tactical awareness just takes time. So you have to be aware of that. There's obviously physical maturity. Some boys only mature 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. The peak performance years are actually more or less around 24 to 27 years old, right up into your 30s. So because we have 18-year-olds competing with adults, it's unfair to assume that the 18-year-old needs to be at peak physical condition and competing at 100% in the top leagues at that age group, because physically they're behind and neuropsychologically they're behind. So the two things that are becoming prerequisites in football, which is physical capabilities and your tactical awareness, at 18, 19, 20, 21, you behind those at their peak performance. So you shouldn't have the expectation that you should be playing there. You should have the expectation that you're on a journey to reach there. So these are just some stats, just to give everybody an idea. So this is the South African Football League, as you can see. Okay, and these are all the clubs on the side, okay, and the age groups at the bottom. And you can see the majority of the players fall between 23 and 34. The minority of players is between really 15, 16 to 21. So this is why I said the first story was dangerous, that I'm different from the others. And if we have that mentality, then we have the mentality that we should be playing the PSL when we 17, 18, 19. Now, the scariest stat around this is a squad list, is that the percentage of players who played in those age groups 16 to 23 is even lower than those that are there. So it's quite scary that those players are in the squad, but they're not necessarily playing professional football. They are on your one-year contracts. And you can see in the age averages, so these are the squads, numbers of players in the squad, and then the average age. And the average age of every squad in South Africa is above the age of 24. So we have to be aware that professional footballers are maturing later, right? And therefore, squads are older in age. Now, this is not a South African trend. If I take you across 4 of the different leagues around the world, if you look at England, again, there's not one team with an average age under the age of 24. If you go to Portugal, there's 1 club now, 2 clubs in the 23s, but still most of them 26, 25, 26. If you go to Germany, it's a little bit younger, but still, we're still talking 24, 25, 26. And if we go to America, which is the one on the left, the MLS, you can see the averages still. So the average across the globe, across football, it's that peak performance age, 24 to 30. So again, to have the expectation that you should be playing in these leagues at 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 is dangerous, because the majority of players aren't playing in those age groups. So, and that brings us to another obstacle which we have, which is how many South African players are playing abroad. Now, this is a infographic from 2021 that there's no South African footballers playing in Europe's 11 major leagues. Now, that's quite a scary stat, considering that most of our boys have ambitions of playing in those 11 major European leagues, right? So we'll discuss ways around that. Okay, and this word cloud is showing you where the South Africans are playing. So there's, when I did this, there was 83 South Africans playing international or registered in international leagues. And you can see most of them are in the USA, New Zealand, it's the USA, then Portugal. And then you have other countries, Georgia, Finland, England, Sweden, Northern Ireland, Denmark, Scotland, Congo. And the players are scattered all around the world at different levels. Now, the reason why this picture is important and these 2 stats are important is that we need to redefine our goals. So we need to have SMART goals that are realistic and that we can actually measure to achieve. There is ways of playing in the European major leagues. There's been many South African footballers who have achieved success in the Premier League, in Portugal, in Germany. It's not impossible. But there has to be an understanding that the steps it takes to get there needs to be realistic. Otherwise, what it creates is unrealistic expectation, disappointment, and then dropout. So what players need to define to themselves is, what is making it? Right? Is playing in Iran making it in their minds? And it might be, and that's not a problem either. Is playing in Reunion, professional football in Reunion, a goal? And often when we have these discussions with the players, the answer would be no. So, but yet there's this desire to play professional football is the ultimate goal. But the goal needs to be a little bit more refined and a little bit more realistic and measurable. So you can take baby steps and you can be patient between the transition years. So reasons why those stats are the way that they are is that South African football obviously has its challenges, and this presentation is not to criticize or to do anything around that, but it's just to bring light to some of these challenges so we can be more informed about things that we can put into place in order to overcome them. And the first one is development. For the most part, South African football industry doesn't have access to professional and qualified coaches. There's a lot of passion for football, and that's one thing, but internationally, a lot of the coaches in youth structures are qualified football coaches because football is seen as a profession. There would be some form of education that coach would have had to undergo in order to coach at certain levels, right? And therefore, we're years behind. Right? Now, this doesn't mean that we'll forever be years behind. This just means that we need to do things in order to help us progress and evolve at an accelerated rate in order to catch up. Obviously, physical profiles. So physicality is becoming a prerequisite in football globally, in South Africa as well, and globally around the world. And Europe and South Africa is a stark contrast in what those physical profiles look like. Right? What that means is that extra work is required from players and families in order to play in these leagues, right, before physical maturity. So we then have to be aware that for an 17, 18-year-old boy, it might be unrealistic to play in Europe's top leagues because they're not physically mature. So we might have to be more patient with them, allow them to develop physically before sort of guiding them on their way. So the other routes do exist. For example, the Portuguese avenue, playing in the lower leagues, is a viable option and is showing success. Playing in the lower leagues in South Africa, players are going from South Africa into Europe. It does happen, right? Because we have to respect that you have to be playing at a certain level, and you can't have this entitlement that you should be playing at higher levels. You need to be patient with all these complex things that play with each other. Obviously, in Europe as well, with obviously visa issues and stuff like that, which I'll discuss, but foreign players need to be a differentiator. There has to be something different about you. Now, the challenge with that is that obviously a lot of footballers are molding their football on European role models, which is 100% perfect, right? So therefore, when you're turning 18, 19, 20, you know different to players developed in Europe, right? At least through style and the way you've applied yourself. Now that's also not a problem, right? If you understand that. So this is understanding who you are, introspecting what kind of player am I, and then taking the route that best suits you, not taking the route that someone else has taken, but suited them. Okay, trends in football, the 90s, the 2000s, obviously the 2010s, football is rapidly evolving. And it's gone from pure talent to almost chess at the moment, and tactical superiority and organization. And this is changing because essentially a differentiator could be your tactical awareness. It doesn't have to be anything else. So becoming a student of the game is becoming more and more important. And then obviously in South Africa, we lack a bit of credibility. I know when Zako was in Portugal, someone said to him, the South African national team doesn't achieve success, so nobody's looking down there. And that's the reality. Ghana, Nigeria, they achieve success on the international stage, always at the World Cup, doing well, AFCON. They draw attention towards their players. And obviously continental club success. I think Mamelodi Sundowns has done us all a favor and has done great in terms of creating professionalism within South African sport. And continental club success does create attention around South African football. And it's something, obviously, as other clubs start to evolve and catch up, because Sundowns are setting the trend, as other clubs catch up, hopefully we'll see this change as well. Cool. So understanding the European football opportunities. Most players, when they join us, say, I want to play European football. Now, there's, at the moment, a lot of FIFA rules and regulations around this. And at under 18 level, it's not impossible because there are some loopholes, but it is impossible for players under the age of 18 to play in Europe. I think the only restrictions or the only loopholes that your parents have to have moved to the country for reasons not associated with football, so work or something, but clubs used to take players over with their parents to overcome the loophole, but your parents actually have to show that they're working in the country not related to football. So there's a lot of legislation around moving players under the age of 18. So players under the age of 18 need to be patient and understand this, that there is legislation that you cannot control, and you can only control things that you can do. And becoming impatient and disgruntled about this only makes it more difficult. Players over the age of 18, it now depends on where you want to play. For example, in England, in order to get a visa to play English football, you have to have a certain number of national team caps, and your national team has to be ranked in the top 70 countries in the world. So most of you would know Percy Tau and understand that although he signed for Brighton, he couldn't play for them. He couldn't get a visa, so he had to play in Belgium first. So there's legislation, and different countries have different rules. I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to say I am. But as obviously the program evolves, we learn a little bit about this and how it works, then it obviously becomes a little bit easier to share information. But we have to be understanding that there are rules and regulations outside of our control that determines where players can move and steps they can take. Okay. The other one is Europe is not one place. There's also this perception we often hear, I'm playing Europe, it doesn't matter where. And if I say, well, do you want to play at a said country in their second division? Most players would say no, but I say, but it's in Europe. And that's why we determine, we've been going back to, you need to define your goals. There needs to be definite goals, and they need to be realistic, because then you can take steps to achieving your goals, right? Realistic steps. And you have to also define what it means to you to be making it. Because if you want to play in Europe, well, we can put you in a set country in the second division, and there's your goal achieved. You're playing in Europe, making 200-300 euros a month, and your parents have to support you. But your goal was to play in Europe. So I think that's important. Also, different countries have different development and professional structures. So Europe, football industry is also not one place. There's also this perception that if you go to Europe, all the countries and all the leagues are around the same. I think, it's credit to South Africa, but a few years ago, I don't know if it's the same, was in the top 7 administered leagues in the world. Right? So not even all the European leagues are top administered leagues. So there's also something we have to be aware of. And then, but there are authentic routes into Europe. So if players are well advised and do take the steps that they need to according to where they are physically, obviously with regards to their technical development and regards to their tactical awareness, if they make those decisions, and also with regard to their maturity, you can have a player that's got everything going for them. Physical, technically they're fantastic, tactically on another level. But if they're not ready, putting the player there is only doing them a disservice. They might need to take smaller steps if they want to achieve success. Obviously, there's this big thing around agents. Do I need an agent? Don't I need an agent? And I know that there is legislation on the horizon that's going to completely change the way agents operate. So just keep an eye out for that. As far as I'm aware, there's going to be greater control, and there's going to be a need for qualification. So people just saying, I'm an agent, apparently it's going to be a thing of the past, which I think is better, because obviously it creates more protection for players in need. It might be a little bit more difficult in the beginning, because obviously there's going to be this barrier to entry for people who do have good intentions, but obviously just to understand that. And then there's obviously a lot of exploitation around the agency. If you come with me, I'll take you to Europe. It will cost set amount of money, and I'll take you on trial. And when you go there, it's A, probably not what you expected, and B, probably maybe not a trial, maybe an experience. So, and the reality is you'll never know this unless you investigate the reality and try to get referrals from other people who have used these agencies or experiences. So it's really important to make sure that you do your homework, both the players and the parents, and we are more than willing to help. The football world is a small world, And we've had players from last year calling us, asking us about Vietnam and Indonesia and all these places where they're supposed to go and someone's going to take them. And we have to be very careful. I know players, I don't want to use the word desperate, but the players can sometimes come across desperate, and desperate leaves you vulnerable to exploitation. So we have to be reasonable, understand where we are, trust people around us, and put people around you that you trust, make good informed decisions, and be patient. There's no, if you don't take it now, it's never going to come again, which is something that obviously is used to put pressure on people. So just to understand that the European football opportunities, sometimes it's a dream, and we have to be more realistic about how we're going to take those steps. I will answer your questions at the end. I see there's a question. So then the big question is it possible to have concurrent goals? Can we do two things at once? Can we be a footballer and something else? And I think it's vital. I don't think it's a question. I think it should be a statement that yes, we can. I can be a footballer and a business and a businessman. I can be a footballer and an accountant. I can be a footballer and anything else, a plumber, electrician. Because having concurrent goals is important, because even if you do make it in football, longevity, we're talking 10, 15 years, and you would still need something to do after that. The 1%ers are making enough money to live forever on that money. And most of them are still working afterwards because easy come, easy go. And the high life costs money, and Instagram and Bentleys and Ferraris cost money. Ronaldo and them, they still invest their money, they still have businesses. So you still have to create a life for yourself after football. And therefore, starting as soon as possible is better for many reasons. A, because it allows you to get something done in the transition years, 18 to 23, which is the typical time that would take most people to do some form of education, internship, apprenticeship, academic varsities or varsities, stuff like that. So you can now have two goals at the same time. The other statement we hear is that after football, I'll study. And the reality, I'm sure most of the parents would know, is that life gets complicated when you have a family and you have a job and studying now full-time or part-time becomes very difficult to handle. And often players won't return to studying. So why not start now? Why not have two goals? Why not develop passions or off the field in order to start developing those concurrent goals? And then I've outlined a lot of challenges, which I'm going to try and shed some hope about, but there's ultimately controllables and uncontrollables. And this, I think, has to be, again, a shift of mentality, is that there tends to be a little bit, and it's not a South African thing, this is an international thing, because Liver and Zaka went to Portugal, they have the same problem. There seems to be this element that youth players are trying to control things that they can't control. And things we can't control is legislation. We can't change FIFA's rules, and I don't think we should either. I think that rule that's in place at the moment is fantastic to protect children from exploitation and families as well. We can't control the football industry underworld. Football industry, unfortunately, has this power that is underneath. It's not a person or a place or a club or anything, but it's this power that exists that dictates the football industry at the moment. And that is across the world. It's not a South African problem. It's not an international problem. It's just the football industry is different at the moment. We can't control people's perceptions, but we need to understand that the players need to understand that they have to play at appropriate levels. So they need to introspect, say, where am I honestly on this scale? Ask people around them if they're unsure, right? And then start at that level. Start at that level, take baby steps, expose yourself, and then move through it. And the last one, obviously, is geographic location. So geographic locations is, you can't, if you're under the age of 18, then you can't be playing for Manchester City. So you can't control that. So to create that as an expectation that you should have been there is dangerous. Again, also, if you're over the age of 18, you can't be playing in the Premier League unless you play for a national team or in the top 70. So I don't know where Bafana Bafana is at the moment, but that's the limitation. So you'd have to take another route. Things you can control: your attitude, your energy, your perceptions, your education. And education, I'm talking about self-improvement and trying to immerse yourself in the industry, trying to immerse yourself in other industries to gain skills that could assist you, and obviously your time. So then I guess the big question is, what are the pathways? What do we do then? Because we have all these obstacles, we have all these challenges. What do we do? And there's many options, and there's a lot of different options. Some are good for some and some are good for the others. So this is not a one size fits all, but let's go through them. So there's the professional industry. Now the professional industry, on every slide you'll see I have concurrent goal, because even professional footballers have concurrent goals. You'll hear stories of them studying this, studying that while they're playing. Okay. Now professional football, in my mind, at least, is being paid a living wage to play football. So not a stipend, not a minimum wage, getting paid a wage that you can live. You can have an apartment, food. I don't know if you have a young family. And to me, that is professional football. It's sustaining a certain lifestyle. Okay, like I said before, you have to appreciate there's a difference between the maturity of a 18 to under 23, okay, and the average age of a professional footballer. So becoming a professional footballer might be when I'm 24, 25, 26. Maybe I have to push my goals back a bit, be patient, work on my concurrent goals, stay in the industry, and then I can aspire to become a professional footballer. Patience, so playing in the lower leagues while working on the concurrent goal. Concurrent goals buys players time, teaches valuable life lessons, accountability and responsibility, and sets you up for life after football. European lower leagues, dependent on each league and each club. Obviously, you most likely need an agent or some form of a network in order to facilitate that. It's also that's why I said there's certain things you can't control, and the football underworld is one. How clubs take players and how that works. And then the other one is, the football industry is difficult to navigate, even for those within it. Even though we understand the industry, it's still a challenge for us. We still have to get creative with solutions. And that's because there's this complex interplay of socioeconomic and geopolitical factors, which some are way out of our control, some are we can try and manipulate, and some we can control. And also trends change with what is required. If you want to play for a said club, and you're a right back, and that club has got 3 right backs, it doesn't matter what you can control. They're not looking for right backs. So your expectation needs to change. You might need to go to another club in order to play. And obviously trust. Football industry is built on trust, and there's a lot of mistrust and distrust as well. But for the most part, people trust certain people. And that's why picking up the phone in football is more powerful than a CV and more powerful than an email, because the industry at the moment is built on trust. And we can argue that's good or bad, but the reality is that's the way it is at the moment. The European pathway, again, plus your concurrent goal. So there's paid and unpaid options. Lower divisions, we're talking 3, 4, 5, 6 levels down, depends which country you go to. Okay, and the one thing we have to consider is European living costs. So to give you an idea, there is an option to go play in Europe at the moment, which exists, that you got to pay 1,500 euros to 1,500 to 3,000 euros, depending on where you live and where you are. You have to pay that out of your own pocket, and you will play in a European lower league team. And that's the economics of football at the moment. And if you think about that, if you're paying 2,000, that's about 40,000 Rand a month to play professional football, to play football in a professional league, but you're unpaid. And what's this? And this is being termed as the investment year, that 6 to 12 months, players have to pay their way. Not necessarily, obviously it depends. I was talking about the underworld. Don't know necessarily where, but you're paying to live in Europe. And that's no different to South Africa. For example, if you're playing the SAB, most likely not getting paid. So somebody has to fund your life. It's you through another job, or your parents are supporting you. So there's this investment here which exists at the moment. And obviously it's difficult to navigate, because what's real and what's not real. And like I said, there needs to be a good amount of research going into it. There's also this illusion that playing in Europe is better. It's often away from home, which for most people is a challenge. It's tough physical training and there's ruthless competition. Europe is where everybody wants to be. So where in South Africa, you're competing with X amount of players. In Europe, you're competing with X squared. And that's something you have to consider is some of those players are fighting for their livelihoods. If you are as well, then you're one of those players. If you're not, then you're some of the other players. So you have to consider where you are. And even if you did do all this, you managed to navigate this, there is still no guarantee. You could still go do this investment year, play in Europe. After 1 year, they release you. Okay, semi-professional football in South Africa, again, always your concurrent goal. There's paid and unpaid options, right? And this is club dependent. You could, for example, in the SAB streams, either no wage or a stipend, something for traveling expenses. SAB streams, again, different clubs, are you getting a living wage or not? What is a living wage in your environment? For some players it is, and for some players it isn't. Okay, and there is an unders and overs rule in South African football, in the NFD, SAB, and ABC, that they have to field a certain number of players under a certain age group. Along with that, there's also a limit on international players. So foreign players, there's a limit on how many they can field. So typically clubs who are competing for promotion will prefer to sign older international players with more experience, because if you only have limited spots, you would rather invest it in older players with more experience. It's going to help you, in your opinion at least, provide other things, experience, more physical maturity, and obviously experience playing the game. So that obviously limits the opportunities for internationally based players under the age of 23. And for most players, it's going to get worse before it gets better in terms of facilities, coaching, programs, and it's difficult to stay motivated during this time and at this level, right? In saying that, this is a good entry level for most players, especially the SAB, because what it does, it starts to develop a playing record. Now, a playing record is important because if you're unable to show that you have been playing at some form of result-orientated league, a lot of clubs won't necessarily be that interested in you. And that's, I talk about trust. There's a mistrust of amateur football. So therefore, even though the SAB is the fourth tier of South African football, there's slightly more trust. So even this level, it is a good level, especially if you're working on your concurrent goal. If you are studying something and you are spending time educating yourself, physically maturing, this is a good level to enter football at, right? And a lot of people believe that they disregard the lower levels because they believe they're better. But that's where I talk about the dangerous stories. I'm different from the others. Is that most likely, that's why it's called the average. On average, you fall somewhere in between. And if you fall somewhere in between, then you know what you need to do in order to make yourself push onto the top percentiles, right? If you believe that you're at the top already, it becomes difficult because you think you're doing the right things already. So it's a little bit of ego, and players often have to introspect, which I always talk about, and say, where am I? What is my level? That's where I need to enter the game. And then obviously there's amateur football. Again, concurrent goal, there's lots of options. There's Super League options, lower divisions. It can be difficult to progress, but it is possible, okay? The question players have to ask themselves, if I'm playing amateur football, am I the best player on the field? If you're the best player on the field, then at least you know that you're taking positive steps towards your goal. And that has to be the first goal in amateur football. 22 players, I need to be the best player on the field, because then you're able to show that you can progress to the levels. Now, during amateur football time, the concurrent goal, in my opinion, should be non-negotiable. And the reason why I say that is because you have time. You have time to study, you have time to work, you have time to do an apprenticeship, internship, craftsmanship. There's time to do these things, and therefore amateur football is an option. This is the option I took to get there. Now, I'll paint a little bit about my story at the end, so hopefully give you an idea. But this is the route I took and other players took. I was studying at University of Wits, Wits University, physiotherapy, and playing amateur football. after amateur football, I was then able to progress to professional football. Now, of course, I had a contacts within the game, right, which obviously helps. Don't get me wrong. Talk about that football industry underworld, the force that drives it. But if you have the right network, if you have the right character, you can progress through amateur football into semi-professional and professional football. There's the US college route. Again, the US college route is a fantastic option for those who can afford it or those who are interested in it, because it marries everything we've just spoken about. It takes your concurrent golf and wedges it together with your football, playing in organized structures, right, with decent level of coaching, obviously facilities, coaching experience. It's all driven by the colleges and stuff. So each college is different, and you can imagine how many there are across America. There's all different levels, all different programs. Okay, it is a viable route into professional football across the States, Europe, across the world, because you have a playing record. You've been playing in a set structure that is trusted for years, and therefore it's easier to progress. For me, a fantastic cultural diversity experience, are living away from home, so learning the challenges, right? But typically, again, you're living away from home with a little bit of support, because you'd be in this college program where there'd be people supporting international students. Okay, it is difficult, in my opinion, to navigate the system on your own. There's lots of agencies out there. Do research, ask referrals, try and understand the system as much as possible before taking active steps towards it. So the younger, the better to start, but obviously, they do take these colleges and agencies do take players 18, 19, 20 as well. South African university system is more and more becoming a viable option. Okay, again, similar to the American system, it marries football and education, right? Buys you time, allows you to work on those things we were talking about earlier, the early versus the late maturers. Depending on the university you go to, there's organized coaching structures. There are some good universities with good programs producing professional footballers. Well, assisting professional footballers, facilitating the process. You get television exposure, which is unheard of in any other league, unless you're playing Disky League. In juniors, to be playing on television, to have footage. Again, we talk about credibility, trust, and building that CV. The different levels, and obviously there's organized leagues. And just to make a note there, you need a second language to get into university. Okay, in South Africa. Scholarship options vary across universities. Again, each university is different. We're obviously learning more and more about certain universities, so we have a little bit of information for those who are interested. We're almost there. So the way our role in this process, as we see it, is that we are a development academy. Our job is to make players better from A to B and then to guide them on. Right? We provide an environment that promotes development. Now, each player is different, and we understand that, and each player needs to understand it. And that's what I talk about comparing apples and oranges. Right? We will never say if someone is good enough or not. I know some parents want an answer to that question, but football just doesn't work that way. There's a lot of footballers playing football who we don't necessarily think should be, right? And a lot of good footballers who aren't playing football for many other reasons, okay? We have never, and we will never promise anyone anything. One of the challenges of the football industry is there is no guarantees, unfortunately. We can't control things we can't control, okay? Players need to take full advantage of the program, and that still might not be enough. That is the reality of sport. You have to give everything you have, immerse yourself, and still might not be enough. Okay? The football industry is not like tertiary education, right? Where meeting the minimum standard sets you up on the path. I studied physiotherapy. If I got 50%, 51% for every test, and someone got 90%, we got the same piece of paper at the end. Football doesn't work that way. And even those who get 90% at football, there's still no guarantee, unfortunately. Okay. And obviously the one thing we do is we can put you in front of the right people. We're having a lot more success recently with a little bit more of our players getting success, going out on trials, having experiences, and sort of building up the credibility. Okay. BSR obviously provides elite level coaching and professional auxiliary services, right? And the half point of this presentation is to provide you with honest advice and career guidance. We also chat one-on-one with the players, okay? And obviously we encourage the players to engage with us as much as possible so they get the most out of it. We're an evolving program. We're learning as we go. We learn from the parents, we learn from the players. As you ask questions, we try and find solutions. So feel free to let me know at any stage if you have questions, concerns, or anything like that. And the one thing I would like to say is that with regard to the entitlement and regards to the minimum standards is that signing up for the EDP program merely gives the player a place within the program. Everything else is up to them. Okay, and the parents and we'll provide opportunities, right, to develop, but there is still no guarantee, unfortunately, in sport. So my final message to you is that I think we need a mindset change. We need to see football as a career, as a profession. If you want to progress, okay, we have to use university as an analogy. We have to apply ourselves every day. Attend class, attend football lessons. Apply ourselves, study after work, study after class, and using that mind frame in order to create success. Professionalism starts with small things. There's no switch. A lot of players think that, well, when I become a professional, I will work harder. I will do this. I will do that. Right? There's no switch. The details matter. You have to make sure that you can produce every day, and those habits will carry on with you. And fortunately or unfortunately now, players have to ask themselves if they're commercially viable. So is their attitude one that's going to contribute positively to the club? Is their character something that the club wants? Do they dress? I'm not talking fashion. I'm talking about respecting the clothes that they wear. I'm talking about, are they arriving in the right uniform? Are they obeying the rules? Are they wearing the right training kit? Are they everything else in regards to commercially viable? Okay. And then patient, we need to be patient and manage our expectations, particularly between 18 and 23. Okay. Develop an identity off the field, I think is important. There is hope. Okay. There is hope, and there is ways to achieve to become a professional footballer. And finally, that there's a book at the moment called Dual Dream by Dave Waters. We can get you a copy. I think it's a fantastic read. It outlines sort of what we've spoken about today, and it discusses the concurrent dream. And I think, and the rest of the team thinks that this is essential in order to develop success. Okay, that's it. Questions? There is two questions. Good evening. Okay, about the weather, that's cool. When you say physical, do you mean muscle mass and strength, core otherwise, or do you mean height and weight? Perfect. So physical, it depends on the club. So for example, club in Portugal at the moment is looking for tall players, right? Doesn't exclude shorter players. It just means that is their default, that they're going to prefer taller players. There will be other clubs who prefer players to be stronger. But whatever capabilities you have, the players need to maximize. If speed, strength are your two main physical characteristics and height isn't, then you need to make sure you maximize those two. If height is your characteristic, you need to make sure you maximize height. It's not really weight, because weight can obviously affect performance. So it's more performance, but it's maximizing your physical qualities. If top end speed and sprinting is what you have, when you play, that has to be the characteristic that you show. You can't have speed and not show it, because that is ultimately the differentiator. So I hope that answers your question. And then financial literacy is important for young, 100%. I don't disagree with you. Is there any questions? You can unmute yourself or comments. Doesn't seem to be any questions or comments. On that note,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, my name is Dina. So this is a lot actually to digest. More so as parents, some of us, we don't have this literacy of football. So the question I have is, are you going to share some of the slides? Because I believe we need to, or I need to discuss some of this, the bullet points that I think are important to discuss with the player or the student. I can agree or I can attest for some of these things that you have actually mentioned here is what is going on in their minds. So probably try to emphasize with some of these notes. I'm not sure whether they're connected to this conversation or they do have a separate conversation from this one. Over.
Perfect. Yeah, so this is being recorded. It will go on YouTube and then can be watched freely. I mean, I think and then I can also share the slides. This information is not I can share the slides if you want, but the presentation will go up on on YouTube. The other one is the players were invited, but this is one of my concerns is that the players were invited and the majority of people here are the parents. And it's one of those dangerous stories that sometimes the players don't want to confront the reality because it's uncomfortable. But it's only by confronting the uncomfortable situations that we can actually create solutions for them. So the players were invited. There are a few on here. I know I can see a few of you. But yeah, so it is a challenge that we try continuously to say the same message, and if the parents can do the same, eventually we will get through. The message will get through, and for some it will get through today, and for some it will get through in 3 months' time. That's okay as well. It doesn't have to be everyone at the same time.
Okay, noted. Thanks.
Okay, so there's a question: are there plans to have mental coaching to prepare them for life for their professional life? Yeah, we do small sessions with them. We are planning, obviously, to do a more comprehensive thing in the future, but we do small things with them. To be honest with you, one of our biggest challenges is actually getting information out of the players. And maybe the parents can guide me on how best to do it, but there definitely seems to be a little bit of unknown from the players, and uncertainty and fear in expressing themselves. And I understand, I was a teenager as well. I didn't speak openly about many things. But it's quite difficult to help them when we don't know where they are. So I think as the parents, they're probably, well, they're definitely a lot closer to you. So if you could encourage them to come forward, some of them do, and say, and I'm struggling with this, I'm struggling with that, because it's difficult to create a mental program because mental strength is so diverse when we don't know the challenges. And I had a meeting with them about this, and they said they were keen. And when I gave out slips for answers and activities, I got 4 or 5 responses out of 30 boys. So it is difficult. Obviously, we're not stopping. We just continue. But just to give an idea that it is difficult to get information out of them, and I'm sure you know that as well. But if you can encourage them, it just has to be continuous. I mean, I was recently with a rugby union, and they have the same challenges with the boys the same ages. So this is not a unique BSR thing. This is not a unique thing in sport. But the one thing that sort of encourages, motivates me is that we can't be making the same mistakes that we made 10 years ago. That the players need to be evolving. And I think as the parents, there's obviously an evolution because there's interest and there's the desire, but the players, that's what I talk about the I'm different from the others, a dangerous story, because they're making the same mistakes we were making. And as much as we try and push onto them that we made those same mistakes, there's this belief in them that they're not going to make the same. And it's so difficult to navigate, but we try our best, and I'm sure you're trying your best as well. And we won't give up. I mean, like I said, some will click today, and on the others it will click in 6 months' time, and we will keep going until we can't anymore. Yeah, so sports psychology is a good investment, especially for downsides of the journey professional football, 100%. Okay. Perfect. And there's a comment about understanding life ahead. Thanks, Nelly. Yeah, like I said, the football is forever evolving. If, as I said, every player is different. So as you experience challenges, we encourage you to bring them forward to us, because we can then help navigate the system. So the more we know, the better we can help. And I really want this to be an open communication. We don't have 200-300 boys for a reason, and that's so that we can provide care as to the standards that we demand. So if you do have questions, concerns, anything that comes up, you can send us an email either directly to me or through your mentor, and then we can take it from there. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and enjoy your evening.